So, hi, I'm Emily Golden, for those of you that don't know me. Thanks, Emily. Have you all enjoyed the conference so far?
That's great.
Very much.
That's really well done.
So, I know most of you, for those of you that don't know, or that I don't know, are you teachers, parents, both?
University professor.
I'm Karen.
Excellent. So I'm Emily, as I said. I'm a senior here at Carey Academy. I've been here since 7th grade. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about my experiences at Carey Academy a little bit later. But just a little bit about me and why I got involved with STEP. I'm hoping to go into education, some form of child development, hopefully special education. And I'm really interested in education policy, which is why my work with STEP has been so great. And I'm also a big believer in taking initiative in your own education. And so that's what sort of got me involved with STEP. I also participated in the Step Forward seminar during Discovery Term, which is the group that began planning this conference. And I got to meet with a lot of great experts in the field of education, many of whom are here at the conference speaking. And that's when I created this presentation. Thank you. A little bit more about me. Personally, I work for Miracle League of the Triangle, which is a baseball softball organization for kids with special needs. And I also am a camp counselor at a camp called Crazy Brain. And I'll talk a little bit more about being a camp counselor versus being a student later. At Carey Academy, I'm the leader of a couple clubs, Students Against Destructive Decisions, CA Green, and Autism Awareness, as well as STEP. Because when you're a senior, the first question anyone ever asks you is where you're looking at for college. I'm looking at either Elon, UNC Chapel Hill, or University of Mary Washington. Before we get started, does anybody have any questions about me or Carey Academy? No? Okay. So what is special education? Many of you, or most of you probably already know this, and the only reason I put it up there is to contrast the next thing we're going to talk about, because I'm not a big fan of formal definitions, and the work we do in STEP is sort of trying to eliminate more formal definitions. So through my work of creating this presentation, I spoke to other teachers and administrators at Carey Academy, as well as parents of kids with special needs, and some other students at Carey Academy, and we created a different definition, which is special education is individualizing teaching style based on students' personal needs and ability. And so through my communications with other people, that's the definition we came up with. The quotes around the page are other things that came up before we came to that one thought. My personal favorite is helping any student thrive. I want to talk about the difference in terminology between learning difference and learning disability, because that's something that I didn't know, and through talking to parents and other faculty members, I came to learn it's more of a difference in philosophy more than anything. The only difference between the two is strictly in vocabulary, whereas learning disability focuses on an individual's cognitive weakness, and difference places emphasis on the fact that they simply approach learning a little bit differently than other people. And it is a difference in philosophy that I've come to learn, and looking back on my education here at Carey Academy, it's something that I didn't really realize at the time, but now see in retrospect. I'm going to use the term learning difference throughout this presentation. I also want to talk a little bit about learning styles, which isn't a learning difference, obviously, but it's a difference in how you learn. And I want to do a learning style activity, which I'm a big fan of, that we did in STEP. So first, can you read the question at the top of the page and just think how you personally would answer it? I know the font's kind of small. Has everyone had a chance to? Okay. So the activity we're going to do, I'm going to show you, it's actually 15 items, we might do less. Some you can see, some you can hear, and some you can touch. And then at the end of the presentation, or at the end of the activity, I'm going to ask you to remember as many of the items as you can. So we're going to do audio first. Oops. Sorry. I don't know why it's not going. Okay. Well, I'm just going to play you the sound clips. I don't know why that's not working. Okay, that's the first one. Can you hear them? Okay, that's the second one. This one takes a second to load. And the last one. Okay. Eric, why aren't I projecting anymore? Thanks. Except now I can't see my screen. Oh, there we go. Sorry. There are the pictures. Take a minute. Okay. And then here are the things. This is kind of fun.
What is this?
It's an RC car.
Oh, okay.
My dad gets them every year for Christmas.
Okay.
We got
His
it.
Christmas present.
Yeah, don't tell him I stole it.
Let's play with that. Can we turn it on? I've never seen this.
Yeah, I should have brought the.
I know, is this a nice one?
I want a mug like that.
Oh yeah, sorry, Mom, I took that.
And this is my tier.
Try to get for Christmas?
I wear the tier. It's fun at our house on Christmas morning.
Okay, so now try to write down as many of the things as you remember.
So
I
you're
have a
gonna
way.
have mine.
Oh wait, yeah, wait, no. Don't cheat. What would I do without you, Mom? Eric, do you want to play?
No, I'm good.
Did you get on the line? Very impressed. So typically this activity is done over a longer period of time, which makes it a little bit harder to remember the things, but I didn't have that option. But did anyone distinctly remember one category better than any of the other ones?
Yes.
Yes.
So I found that activity really interesting, and that's actually not what I did when I figured out my learning style, but I did very specifically think that I was a visual learner. I was completely convinced that I was a visual learner. And then I went in for testing for my learning difference, and turns out I was not a visual learner. Turns out I'm a kinesthetic learner. And that completely changed the way I approached my education and approached my learning.
How?
I oftentimes, or in the beginning anyway, I was convinced that I could read a text and remember it completely. So studying and stuff, and this was sophomore year, which I will explain. But I was convinced that I could read a textbook and remember it, or see a picture and remember it. And so that's how I studied. I read. I read over my notes and stuff like that. And then after I found out that I was wrong, I started writing out my notes for studying. And after that, things became a lot easier to remember and to learn. And then in class, if we're doing an activity, it's a lot better for me to engage in it as opposed to just hear it or read about it, which is not what I thought. So learning my learning style prior to my learning difference helped me better communicate with my teachers about what I needed to be the most successful learner possible. Teachers individualizing my lessons for me has helped me so much, both as a student, a very distinct student, and then also a student with some learning differences. I was in 4th grade, and I was taking piano, and I wouldn't read music all the way across the page. I would only read halfway, or I would skip certain notes based on their position on the page. And that was something my piano teacher noticed. And at the same time, I was in 4th grade, and math started getting challenging. And I was really struggling with long division. I would forget to write numbers down, even though I knew that they were supposed to be there. And so my parents, my family talked about it, my teachers and my piano teacher, and decided and came up with strategies to help me. I ended up doing fine in math because of different things my teacher suggested, like turning my page this way so that the notebook paper lines lined up the long division columns. And I was doing well in school, so we didn't really decide there was much there. And so I continued. I was doing fine, came to Carey Academy, and in 7th grade, I was taking Spanish. My first year at Carey Academy, I was taking Spanish, and all of our assessments were on the computer, and I wasn't doing very well. And my teacher thought I just wasn't putting in the work. I knew I was putting in the work. And so my parents went in, we met with my teacher, and I started taking all my assessments on paper. And
Was
things
this
started.
the only subject that you were having difficulty in, or?
I've always struggled with math and Spanish.
Yeah.
But I was doing okay. No red flags, but Spanish, except for Spanish, because of the fact that everything was on the computer. So went in to talk to my teacher agreed to let me do everything on paper as opposed to on the computer, and that helped me, which is something I still do in my classes. Aileen will tell you I print all of my statistics notes, so I have like a giant stack of papers, and my stats teacher lets me do all my homework as opposed to on the computer and submit it online in paper and submit it to him that way, which is great. So the reason Spanish is very, very challenging is because it takes me longer to process what's being said and how to say it back to my teacher. And so giving me things like paper and pencil has really, really helped with that. And all of my teachers at Carey Academy and all of my subjects, but especially math and Spanish, have been really great about working with me. Oops, I forgot to switch slides. So in sophomore year, I have handouts. Sophomore year, I was taking Algebra 2, and we got a test. And I had been doing decent in math until Algebra 2. We got a test, and this is what the tests look like. They're completely made up math problems, so don't try to do them because I don't even know what half the numbers mean. And that's what the tests look like. But that's not how it looks to me. When I'm given an assessment that's spaced like that, that's a little bit more what it looks like. And there are extra numbers on the page, but there aren't supposed to be. It's just supposed to show that it looks more crowded. So I got the test. I had studied, I was prepared, but I failed. I got every single problem wrong. And so my teacher knew that I knew the material and just for some reason, failed, obviously. So one day in the hallway, she pulled me aside and without any extra preparation or prior knowledge of my own, gave me a different test, which looked more like this. It had the same number of problems, oh, you have two. It had the same number of problems and just extra space. And I went from failing to getting every problem correct, simply because my teacher gave me more space. Like no extra time, nothing like that, just more white space on the page, and I got every problem right. Last personal story is about me in Spanish last year. Spanish has always been difficult, but I've always done okay. Last year it got really challenging, and I wasn't doing very well. And then one of the best things any teacher has ever done for me was we were doing an oral presentation, and I had decided that I was never going to get it. I couldn't do it. I gave up. I stopped trying. I stopped participating in class, stuff like that. Classic gave up. And so we were doing an oral presentation, and my teacher pulled me out in the hallway, and I was working, and I didn't know how to complete the assignment. And I told her, I don't know how to do this. I'm not going to do it. I can't. And she said, yes, you can. You know this. You've learned it. You've studied it. And I said, no, I can't. I don't know how to do it. But she sat there with me for like 30 minutes and wouldn't let me give up until I at least attempted to do every single problem. And then after class, she made me go with her, relearn all the things, and redo the assessment. And she didn't change my grade, which I was mad about. She didn't change my grade, but she did make me learn it. And then on the next assessment, it was similar material, so I could do it. And after that, every day in class, every week we met out of class. And she worked with me on the new concepts and made me work through them in a way that worked for me instead of the way that works for other students. And she wouldn't let me give up, even though I was incredibly frustrated. And that's kind of been a theme for me. I'm generally a pretty determined student, but it gets frustrating when you feel like you're putting in so much extra work and no one else is, and all of your peers understand the material and you don't. And it gets frustrating because you feel like you're stupid, even though you know you aren't. And that teacher not letting me give up, as well as all of my teachers working with me to make it so I didn't want to give up, has had the biggest impact on my education. My Spanish teacher understood that I wasn't giving up because I didn't want to, or I didn't want to be there, or I didn't care. She understood that I did know the material and I just struggled with showing it, and that's where my biggest help has come from. She understood that I wasn't incapable and that other students with learning differences are not incapable, but sometimes we just need to prove that we know the material in a different way. And that can be frustrating, and patience can be necessary. And that goes for parents too. I don't know if any of you, well, I do know some of you, are here as students with special needs. And I'm very blessed that my parents have been very understanding and have worked with me and have always helped me advocate for myself. But I get that it's frustrating. It's frustrating for me and it's frustrating for them. And I'm sure it's frustrating for my teachers. I can't even imagine. When I go in every day saying, hey, I did it on paper instead of online, sorry. But a lot of my teachers have understood that I'm there to learn, not for the grade. And obviously the grades are important, but that's not what it's about for me. And sometimes the grades suffer because I just can't show what I know in a way that is traditional. So back to, that's a video we were going to watch if we have time. Back to the original definition I gave you, and yes, that is a pun. Special education is individualizing teaching style based on students' personal need and ability. That's the definition I came to through this presentation and that we've come to in my work with Mr. Coven and with the other students in STEP. But this is also the definition we've come to for education in general. And that's what we're trying to accomplish in this seminar and with our work in STEP, is that education is individualizing teaching style based on students' personal need and ability. I asked at the beginning, I know not all of you are special education teachers, and not all of the students you will teach have special needs, but every student has individual needs, and every student brings individual things to the table. And I know most of you know that, but my experiences have empowered me to be the best student possible. And I know not every student with learning differences and not every student in general feels the same way. And while I get frustrated when a math test looks too crowded, I know there are other things that frustrate students with and without learning differences. And so if there's one thing that I would like everyone to take away from this presentation, it's that an understanding that every student has individual needs based on learning differences or not, and that every student is going to bring different baggage to the table and different things to the table, and that education needs to be more individualized for each student in general. And that's what I'm trying to communicate, and that's what this conference is trying to communicate. So lastly, I want to leave you with a quote that Mr. Coben and I both really, really love, which is imagine others complexly. And this is one of my philosophies of life, but I also think it's very true in education. It can be very easy to disassociate ourselves from others and from our teachers and from our students as teachers. And I think it's important to understand that every student brings different things to the table, whether it be a learning difference or not. And it's necessary that we understand their individual needs. Does anyone have any questions? We have a lot of time. Well, not a lot of time. Yes, Laura.
So I think what you described, like with your story, is one of the reasons why Carey Academy is so great. Like we have teachers that can build relationships with students and notice individual students suffering even though they know that they shouldn't be. And in fact, they came to you. But when you're in a bigger school, how do you suggest that we start, doing the same thing and kind of having the ability to individualize teaching styles for students?
I can't really speak to that. I'm not a teacher, and I've never been in a large school. But we are going to talk about that later in the conference with our ideal education model. But I would say, I guess from a student's perspective, as a student that's needed some accommodations and help, is just not to give up on us and not to let us give up, regardless of the setting. I know I acted out in Spanish last year because I didn't care and I didn't want to seem like I was struggling, and so I was talking too much during class and acting out, and that wasn't because I didn't want to be there, and it wasn't because I hated the class or hated what I was doing. It was because I was frustrated. So that would be what I would say. So
I have a question as a parent of with a child.
Yes, Ms. Jones.
Yes, and not as your teacher. Because my 12-year-old has a learning difference.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was trained as teaching, it was disability.
Right.
And I think a lot of teachers, regular ed teachers, are not trained to go to your. We're not trained. I don't know if they do that now, but 20 years ago, we weren't trained for special ed. But some teachers kind of key into that better than others, and since I've had my daughter, I key into that pretty quickly. As a student, what would you tell a kid who's floundering or just is at that point where they're about to give up? What would you tell?
Not to give up?
Yeah,
No,
but
no.
you have to. Yeah, but that's
Right.
Yeah, and it comes better. I'm curious, just because if I say one thing, it's
Right.
So what would you tell?
As a senior who's obviously gone through almost all of, that's scary, almost all of high school, I would say that it is very frustrating and it doesn't get easier, but you do learn how your specific things. I can go to a teacher now as a 17-year-old senior in high school and say, look, I need more space, and if they're not going to give me more space, there's nothing I can do about that. But advocating for yourself.
So advocating, teaching,
Yeah.
okay.
But she also knows what her issues are, right? So what her challenges are.
Right,
So
yes.
right,
I think the first thing is to go through whatever you did to figure out
Yeah.
what it is you
Right.
needed.
right.
Right.
And that's what, I guess my question is, because it doesn't matter if I'm a teacher, as a parent, I'm curious,
Yeah.
what would someone tell my child or any other child who's experiencing the same thing, because they'll listen to that probably
Yeah.
more. What would you
I would
tell
say-
them? Because I say, for me, self-advocating that's key, because you won't get
But
any
that
help.
can be hard.
Right,
Yeah.
that's their so I'm curious what you thought, and I like what you thought, so maybe you can come over and tell us.
Absolutely. I would also say, like I totally get that it's frustrating, and it is, and it's frustrating for every student,
Oh, yeah.
and that understanding that it's not just me struggling, and that other people who see things the right way all the time are also struggling with material sometimes, that was huge for me.
So Emily, as you know, you go off into college, right? And you're used to Carey Academy and
Right.
you've learned how this works here. How will you transfer what you know now to a college setting where, you know, it's bigger, they don't know you?
Right.
How will you take that with you?
Well, one of the things I've been looking at through my college search is small school with close relationships with professors, and so that's like first aside strictly like institutional
Okay.
type stuff, but then individually, stuff that I know about my own studying habits and things that I need. Like I can't take notes on a computer.
Yeah.
If I try to take notes on a computer, it just doesn't work. I have to have pencil and paper. I have to have pencil. If I like move through an activity when I'm studying, that helps me. So I don't know if you were here for the modeling session yesterday.
Yes, I was.
Were you in? No, you weren't in my room. We were talking about how modeling can be applied to studying, and so I use models when I study.
Oh.
Like in U.S. history last year, I would make a model of the Civil War to help myself remember more
wow.
specific things. So I know that that works for me, and I'm sure that, you know, Aileen studied differently in English. But learning what works best for you as a student, and then applying that to whatever else you're doing. Yes, ma'am.
As a teacher educator at North Carolina Central University, and we try in all of our methods courses, our whole conceptual framework or theme for preparing our teachers is preparing them for diverse and cultural contexts. I love what you said about I love the definition of special ed, because it is that sense of trying to look at each student's individual need. I guess and I'm intrigued about your personal sharing. I think as we prepare teachers, elementary, middle, and so on, we have come to this whole notion of trying to make sure there is an alignment with making sure that it's just not all methods for general ed, but methods to sort of marry the idea of the exceptionalities or the differences.
Right.
I would love to know what you would say to a class of future teachers. If you could share one critical piece that they would need to walk away with as we prepare them, what would that be from your experience?
The biggest thing that has helped me the most is teachers understanding that I'm not stupid. And I mentioned earlier that I work for Miracle League, and part of that is working with kids with pretty severe disabilities and teaching them how to play baseball. And I guess I would give the same advice to teachers that as people have given to me, and that's, yes, these kids have differences, but don't think of them that way. Take their needs into account, but don't treat them like they're different. Individualize how you're teaching for that kid, but subtract the disability, if that makes sense. Okay.
Emily, I'm thinking through some of the other questions, and I would, Laura, to your point, I would suggest too that one of the extreme challenges in schools that are not Carey Academy for teachers is the number of students in the classroom.
Yeah.
Right, we can have conversations about individualized learning in our classrooms because we cap at 20, right? But many of our colleagues are teaching 35 to 38 students in one classroom, and that's a completely different can of worms, right? But Emily, for me, one of my questions would be, and it comes sort of to your experience in the 10th grade, as you got this information about you,
Right.
and your teachers get it at kind of the same time, you heard it a little bit sooner.
Yeah.
But for you, which was more powerful, getting that information about yourself or having your teachers say to you, I know this about you, you need it this way. Do you see what I mean? And so I'm wondering,
Yeah.
and it could be a chicken and the egg depending on the student,
No.
but I'm wondering for students who are sort of coming to learn their own learning styles, if it's more powerful to have the outreach first, or if it's more powerful to have the self-cognition, the metacognition, if you will, of no, this is me, okay, I have to do this. Which one came first for you?
That's a good question, because I face that teaching.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you want to tell the kids,
I know this will work.
this is for you, but,
Right.
yeah, thanks for asking that.
What grade do you teach?
I teach all grades
All of them.
here.
Oh.
Normally, prior to coming here, I taught 11th grade at Apex High School, And I taught Las Vegas high school, I taught predominantly seniors.
For me, having my teacher come to me was huge because I knew that this was happening, but I didn't know what to do about it. I knew that I needed more white space, but I didn't know how to say it, I guess, or how to make sense of it. And having a teacher come to me and say, hey, look, this isn't bad, it's just different, and here's how I can help you not be bad, just different, was huge for me. Because I thought it was bad. I thought that I was stupid, because that was the case. And so I had a teacher come to me and say, no, you're not weird, this is fine. So, teacher.
So can I ask a question of all the Carey Academy students in the room? You flashed a slide about fairness, and that fairness isn't the same thing for everyone. Fairness is everyone getting what they need. And so my question to the students here is, we would like to say that everyone should know his or her own learning style, but I think a student population, you know who gets extended time.
You can speak up.
You do. And so one of my questions is, do you feel like students feel this way? Do you think that student populations go, fair is everybody getting the same thing, or fair is everybody getting what they need? Because I'll tell you, this is something that in the teacher world, we've been grappling with for the past, 30 years really. That as educators, there's been a lot of conversation about this, and I'm hoping now, from my vantage point, there's been a shift.
I actually had a student who wouldn't take her accommodations here a few years ago.
Because of this.
And she says, well, it's not fair to the others, and I said, essentially I said is, you're all born differently, it's not fair to you that you learn differently than this person, so you need to learn differently.
Right.
And that's completely fair, but she would not do it because it wasn't fair, but it also was her ignoring, not
Right.
wanting to face
Yeah.
her reality.
Right.
And that's
Right.
another thing, I tell my daughter, you have to face your reality. And once you do that, that quote maybe be a little bit more helpful.
But from a student
Students,
perspective, is that, where do you think?
I think that my viewpoint has changed after, like, listening to Emily's presentation, because you do know as a student kind of who will get accommodations for certain things, and it's hard, because I don't have accommodations for anything, so I feel like I'm kind of almost on the outside looking in. It's hard for me to put myself in their shoes and see it as fair. But I definitely think that hearing your story has changed my viewpoint, and I would agree with that definition now.
No, I have always agreed that that is the definition of what is fair. I don't have a need for any special accommodation in school, but my sister does, and she is very severely autistic, and she'll never, be functional, but she's on the extreme idea of this, but she isn't like everyone else, and obviously putting her in a classroom, like in one of the classrooms that I've been in, wouldn't be helpful for her just because of the way that she is, and you can't change that, and you just have to do what's best for the student.
I do have many accommodations, as some of you know, as you taught me, and administrators, but I do agree with this quote, but I do feel like sometimes if I ask for a teacher, I'm a very strong believer in self-advocacy for my learning disabilities and differences, and I see it asking for extra time or quiz corrections or taking a test or quiz in another room. I do feel like it's fair sometimes, but sometimes as a learning difference child, I feel like I'm overstepping my boundaries sometimes, and sometimes a teacher will come and help me and talk to me and tell me how it is okay for me to do this because it's what I need to succeed. So I do.
So my follow-up question, you answer first.
I was just going to say your question kind of reminded me of the SAT because it's exactly the same for every single person I don't have any specific accommodations. I forgot to mention that. Everything my teachers have done for me is purely because they've noticed something and I've asked them for it. And so I don't have any extra time on the SAT or anything like that. or extra space, which is what I really need. But
Yeah, talk about tests that make
yeah.
everything sort of.
Oh, yeah.
Yikes.
But that's what your question reminded me of, because I don't have any experience. I mean, like, I go to Carey Academy, all of my teachers have been great. I don't have any experience with anything super standard until I took the SAT. And so I can't imagine giving every student the same SAT for a student who needed something different, and that's kind of what your question reminded me of, was something very standard.
That's like the test optional schools,
Mm-hmm.
the trend toward
Absolutely.
that, yeah.
It was my follow-up question too is, I'm thinking that it's pretty powerful for students to hear from other students
Yeah.
about how learning is individualized, as opposed to students hearing from me. For those of you who are not part of the Carey Academy community, I have a soapbox that I get up on once a month and sort of, take ownership of your learning, and it's become a little bit of a cliche in the hallway, which is fun. But I'm thinking that there need to be more opportunities like this, because I can get up on my soapbox all I want, but I think this is more powerful.
Well, it changed her whole viewpoint.
Right.
I mean, wow. It's pretty crazy.
I tried to quote Shakespeare, but I couldn't.
That's okay, I appreciate it, I appreciate you trying.
Well, and to that point, there's students with more noticeable differences that become apparent early. Eric, you probably knew fairly early on, and then we had testing done. And with Emily, it was not apparent early on. There's a genetic component. My husband has it, my mother-in-law has it. So we knew to watch for some of those, the visual glitches that they both had when Emily was in school. But they didn't become apparent early. And she was bright, and she was a good student, and she was doing well, and the teachers always said, oh, she's doing great, and she's bringing home all A's. But there was a part of me that said, that's nice, that's nice. I don't care if she's got an A.
Yeah.
I care, more about this, and I care, where. Anyway, it took a long time before it really became apparent that she was struggling with the same kind of glitches, because it was so easy for her to just slide.
I think looking at my daughter, when she started struggling, because she did fine, because she's an overachiever, her teachers thought, oh, it's the cute little blonde girl, she's just not that smart.
Oh, tell me.
And I had a hard time, and I'm an educator, and they would not listen to me. I was wrong, because she tested higher. I'm like, there is something, I don't care, I wanted to label her. Usually some parents don't want that stigma, but your kid needs help. You need to get them help. So you have to fight that battle too, I think, I don't know what needs to be done now with teaching teachers. But for some reason, I've always keyed into that, and so I'm lucky that way. But if you're not exposed to it going into education, you really don't know what to look for, especially when you're a young, new teacher, because you're so overwhelmed with everything. But listening to students is helpful, and that's why I asked you because we are like the Peanuts character, the adults, the they only go so far, and I think having students talk to one another has far more greater impact. Or even if my students know, I know what they're feeling because I have a child at home, that has helped me a lot with students. But not every teacher has a child who has a learning disability.
But I think this is powerful to hear from your peers as
Absolutely.
students, to understand that, it's hard enough to be a teenager, let's face it, right? So the fact that you feel bad about this difference can be really powerful for everybody else to really understand. Everybody feels bad about something about themselves, right? And that we're all different, and that you don't have a disability, we're just all different.
Right.
It could be a really powerful message for everyone to hear, so that when somebody is getting a special accommodation or more time or more space, it's almost not, they don't notice. It's almost like, well, that's just her difference. Mine is something else.
Right.
And then you don't have the shame, because I think kids feel so ashamed anyway about just, their hair. I think it can be really powerful to get this out.
Well, and that's why the first activity that you did was so powerful, right?
Yeah.
To have everybody identify their own learning strengths within that, and then to go into your own journey, right? Because it is
Yeah.
visualized piece.
Yeah.
Well, I remember to go back on like the fairs. I remember back in like 6th grade, 7th grade, I went to a public middle school in Wake County before I came to Carey Academy, and I remember one of my teachers telling my parents, like, they were just like having a quick meeting, like meet the teacher night, and one of the teachers said, Eric can probably go to college. And my mom was like, oh, thanks. Like, of course he can go to college. Like, I didn't start self-advocating to myself until I realized, like, I've been tested 4th grade, 6th grade, and I probably will have to get tested again for college. And what some teachers didn't realize at my old school versus this school is this person is actually bright. And, like, I got straight A's in 6th and 7th grade, and they thought nothing was wrong with me. They didn't ask for me to have extra time. They didn't ask if I needed to take an extra room until, like, I went to them with my mom and talked to them and said, hi, I'm Eric Schwartz, I'm learning challenged. And they then, because it's a class with like 30 plus people, and there are some new teachers. I remember having a 7th grade history teacher, Mr. Miles, I think. He was very helpful having everyone involved in the class, but I would sit in the corner trying to catch up, and I just couldn't. Even though I would get A's on the test, I just was mentally and emotionally behind because everyone else was understanding it. I wasn't, because my learning challenges was not helpful with like his class and stuff.
Well, one of the additional problems I think is testing is so specific and pigeonholed. Okay, you're dyslexic, you're whatever, and the tests that they can do are geared towards pigeonholing the patient, the students, the child, whoever. And in Emily's case, and I know that because I work for a developmental pediatrician, and we would categorize our patients when they came in, because then they would be tested as the category that they sort of fell into. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes that's appropriate. For Emily, that was definitely not appropriate. She's not a category. She's unspecified. After testing, I had access, of course, to some of the best people in this area just because I worked for Dan Moran. And after all these people met with her, they all said, something's not working the way it's working for you and for this person who we don't know.
I bet there's a lot of kids sitting in a classroom. There's something.
Oh,
I think
There's
so,
so many of them, you could just,
For sure.
and it, yeah.
That was sort of my point. I think a lot of kids, like Eric said,
So
he
many.
got straight A's. Emily got really good grades. So I think they get pretty far along, and the kids don't know that they have a difference. So I think as a teacher, training the teachers to recognize that the kids are functioning differently, and for the teacher to approach the child and say, you got a great grade, but you're having, what's up? What's going on?
Or that everybody's different.
Exactly.
Right. It's
Yeah,
not, well,
exactly.
Just Emily, it's, each one of you is different. And
Which is why you need to teach differently
yeah,
all the time.
all the time.
When we work with our our preparing our, this is so powerful. I wish more of my colleagues were here too. But the whole idea is that uniqueness, that difference. And when I'm in and out, because I'm in and out of a lot of the schools across the state where we replace our student teachers, trying to get them to apply that sense of differentiated instruction, looking at their uniqueness along that respect. But it's we've got a way to go. So.
This has been a great discussion. Thank you so much for coming, but it is time to move on.
Thank you.
Okay.